by having a bit of a look at the year in review. So internationally, you would have had to be under a rock the last year not to know that things around the world are still fairly catastrophic. We've got the ongoing war in Yemen. I was listening to the UNHCR Save the Children Fund yesterday, talking about the thousands of children who have been either killed or injured in the bombing. And that seems to be a war that's not getting a lot of international focus, I have to say. But yes, Saudi Arabia is leading the war against the people of Yemen. We've now seen the mopping up of ISIS in Syria and Iraq and the fallout from there. We've got the Taliban resurging in Afghanistan. We've had the ethnic cleansing of the Rohingyas in Myanmar, and of course there's continued civil unrest in Egypt, Nigeria and Sudan. But out of all this chaos, what did the year look like for Australia? The Australian government granted 16,250 humanitarian visas in that last financial year, and considering that we now have 67.2 million refugees around the world, then that number is actually quite tiny. But, we must, I suppose, pay tribute to the government that they're continuing to bring people in. We are still one of the more generous countries in regards to permanent resettlement. And out of those 16,000, almost 8,000 were refugee visas, and about 7,000 were the special humanitarian program. Interestingly, 1,400 of those were actually onshore, so people granted refugee status and permanent residency from the cohort that we have, and the priority areas remain the Middle East and Asia and Africa. And as you're probably all aware from your own workplace at the moment, we've got 18,750 visa grants to come in this year. Now, what will be interesting, of course, if there is a change in government, and whether or not the change in government brings a change in the refugee humanitarian placements. So Labor has actually committed to more than the 18,750. If the Greens ever go in power, they've committed to 50,000, so it's probably highly unlikely at this stage. All right, now, just a little bit of stats while we're still fresh in the morning. If I showed you these after lunch, you'd all be asleep, I think. So no surprises that the main country of birth and the intake still remains Iraq and Syria. Myanmar, the DRC, Congo, Afghanistan, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Bhutan, Iran, Tibet. That takes us down to, and other smaller countries as well. I think what's interesting is a lot of people who had fled Iraq and settled in Syria, so they've had children who are actually born in Syria. So their country of birth is Syria, but they're actually from Iraq. So I think almost those two countries are quite interchangeable. And state of residence. Now, you see that data is 2016. That's actually the latest data that you can get out of the department at the moment. DSS actually does these stats rather than Border Force, so they're a little bit slow. But as you can see, that is an historical trend. New South Wales tends to take between 35 to 40%, and we interchange that with Victoria from year to year, just depending on where the settlement is. And of course, those numbers would be very much dominated by the arrival of people on those special humanitarian visas, because the government has no say as to where they are settled. So that's why sometimes we'll get a bit of a surge into one spot as communities reunite. Okay, now onshore is also a rather interesting profile. Have a look at the number of protection visas lodged, almost 28,000, but only 1,400 have been granted. So that shows you what the burden is through the states and territories in regards to looking after people seeking protection onshore, particularly those who have no work rights and therefore have no access to Medicare. And so even though these are Commonwealth decisions, the burden of healthcare then falls onto the states and territories, and often then falls onto organisations such as the ones that we work with. We've seen quite a bit of activism on the ground, so particularly around airport deportations. I always keep an eye on this, and it's really very interesting seeing the number of airlines now who are saying, actually, we won't be part of this anymore. So the highest grants for people seeking protection are probably no surprise, really: Syria, Libya, Iran, Iraq, and Ethiopia, and they often mirror the countries where our refugee intake comes from. And if you look at the people with the lowest grants, it's actually people seeking asylum from Malaysia and from China and from Egypt. So in Sydney particularly, we have a very high profile of people from PRC, China and Malaysia seeking asylum in Sydney for various reasons. The big problem, of course, is the time it takes to actually grant a visa review and actually grant your refugee status. So we are looking after some people in Sydney who have been here for 6 years, are still waiting for a decision from the department. So 6 years is a long time to be living in poverty, I have to say, or working in the black market for cash in hand, where you're very vulnerable and open to exploitation. And looking at the finalised grants, New South Wales has had 5,000 people granted, and you can see there the rest of the figures. Quite smaller figures are down in Tasmania as well. Okay, a little bit more about us. So as of yesterday, we've got 111 members now in Refugee Nurses Australia, including one from New Zealand. So I don't know if we have to be Refugee Nurses of Australia and New Zealand because of that. We might have to negotiate that. We're really pleased to publish our standards of practice. That was a large piece of work, many hours debating apostrophes and words and phrases and where things came and in what order. So I was just delighted the fact that we were able to pull that together in a relatively short period of time. Twitter is still twittering. One of our tweets had 21,000 hits. So I don't know if you do Twitter, as they say. If you do tweet, or if you're part of Twitter, have a look at the site. If something goes up, it's always good to retweet it if you can, because that gets, it goes out into the Twitterverse, as they say, and all of a sudden tweets become national all around the world. Now, we do have a Facebook page, and I know a lot of people do Facebook, so I do encourage you to get onto Facebook and join the conversation. Our Facebook webmaster is in semi-retirement at the moment, so she's been a little bit quiet, but she's back with a vengeance. So if you like Facebook the way I do, then, as I say, we'd encourage you to get in there and have a go. We've put out the skills survey. You're going to hear a lot more about that this afternoon. You're actually going to have a bit of homework to do. And the other two major things that we're involved in with representatives is Rihanna, and I think I've spelt that incorrectly, and Jan Williams from South Australia represents us on Rihanna, and myself and Leanne Schmidt from Queensland. We represent RNA in the community of interest for the Australian College of Nursing in community and primary health. Okay. So what's next? Well, big one's the federal election. Should be announced they think the election will be announced after the April budget, so that's in about a week and a half. So gird your loins. Anyone from New South Wales has seen some of the absolutely toxic, dreadful politics that have come out just at the state election. So I imagine that it's actually going to be far, far worse for the national election. I don't know if anyone saw the ABC breaking news this morning about One Nation. Anyone see that this morning? Yes, it's been filmed by Al Jazeera, trying to do a deal with the National Rifle Association of America to get donations to them with a plan and a plot, discussing about taking Senate seats in Australia for One Nation so that they have a dominant voice in the Senate. You couldn't make this stuff up, really. So as I say, I think it's, and just a word of, caution to everybody, working in refugee health isn't easy all the time. And I think we need to be particularly mindful and looking after each other in the next weeks and months, because, you know, often when these things happen, as I say, a lot of, you know, racism and poor thinking rises to the surface. So if you're feeling under siege, or if you're feeling that you're getting you know, more than your fair share of arguments or abuse, please call back on us as members of RNA. We're here to support you. I know there are times when I'm a mad keen golfer, and I go to golf and they say to me, "What do you do, dear?" And I say, I work in the community. And they go, "Okay, that's nice, dear." So it's just, you know, in amongst that crowd, I think if I just put my hand up and said, "Well, actually, I'm the nurse manager of the Refugee Health Service," I wouldn't hear the end of it, and I'm actually there to play golf. Golf's actually a really good thing, because when you've had a bad week, you can get the golf ball and you write someone's name on it, and then you smack them down the fairway, and then you get your 3-wood out and you smack them again. So it's a very good way, healthy way to get rid of your aggression. So what have we got planned? We've got the federal election. We are going to complete the skills and competency framework, and you're going to help us do that this afternoon. We are exploring some core education modules with the Australian College of Nursing, because we think that's another really important step in our professional journey, is to establish a knowledge base for practice, and not just for us, but for other nurses out there to learn about refugee health. And Leanne Schmidt, again, busy Leanne, is liaising with ACN about that. We're also going to start exploring models of care and best practice associated with some of those models of care. We may never get a consensus about that, but I think it's worth having a look at what we all do and seeing what the best aspects of those, and as I say, having an aspirational model of care. We've also been asked to contribute to a book chapter in primary health nursing for the first time, to have a chapter around refugee health nursing. That's been coordinated by Professor Elizabeth Howcombe from the University of Wollongong, and who's quite a noted nurse academic and author. So that'll be exciting, and we'll be pleased to announce that the third National Forum will be in Victoria for the next time, so it's Victorians' time to do the work and to show us a good time as well. So all these things to look forward to. Take a deep breath. With your help, and as I say, with the steering committee, I'm sure we'll get there. We've had lots of laughter along the way, and lots of collegiality as well. Okay, any questions, comments? Right on time. Nope, nothing.